there. I am glad you could make it today. I've got a story that comes from three of the Gospels, meaning they told the same story three times, but not exactly the same way. So we get to learn a few things about it because each one gives a little bit more information. So where I'm going to start is um, the time is starting to get closer for Jesus to go to Jerusalem and to suffer at the hands of the chief priests, the elders, the scribes, the people in charge of the Jewish religion. A lot of the common people seemed to like him just fine, but the leaders didn't. He was not what they expected. So he is warning his disciples that these things are going to happen. It's going to be happening not too far in the future, and to be ready because they are going to kill Jesus. And uh, they are not to worry because he will then rise from the dead. That seems pretty clear to us what's going to happen, but they didn't really understand it. And in fact, Peter took Jesus aside and said, "No, this is not going to happen to you." And he used some strong words in saying this, that, this is not going to happen. Jesus turned to Peter and he turned so that the other disciples were hearing this and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, what he was doing, Jesus was rebuking Peter for suggesting such a thing. Now, here's the thing about it is that we may remember from earlier stories that the devil is after Jesus, and right from the beginning, he was either trying to stop him or trying to get Jesus to give in to temptation. Well, this time he does it again. Peter is the means to that. And apparently the other disciples were thinking along the same lines. Just Peter was one of those kind of people who other people would be thinking it, Peter would say it. So it was kind of nice to have him around if you were kind of shy about saying something because you knew sooner or later Peter would say it. Well, he said what the others were thinking, apparently, because Jesus turned on them all when he rebuked Peter. Now, what happens here is that Peter is working for Satan at this time, and he doesn't know it. What he is doing is presenting Jesus with a temptation that the devil had tried to do to Jesus or would try to do to Jesus. And that's a lesson to us in that the devil can try to use us too to get us to do things we shouldn't. And we might not even think about it being the wrong thing. So we have to be careful when we have an urge to tell somebody to do something or not do something, especially if what that person is talking about uh, is in God's favor or doing something for God. If we're trying to stop them, that's not the best indication that our hearts are God's feelings are being in the right place. Obviously, God's feelings and his wants are in the right place, but our hearts might not be in tune to that. Okay, so this story seems to just stop right here. There's a little more discussion, but the next scene is about a week later, and Jesus takes Peter, James, and John. Those are his closest friends amongst the 12, and heads up the mountain. Now, this is a good indication for Peter because when he had gone to tell Jesus all this stuff wasn't going to happen about Jesus being killed, um, that was just something you did not do. You did not talk back to your master when you were following a rabbi. You would not tell him he's wrong about something. So we see that Jesus has apparently forgiven Peter for that, and he's taken him along. So it didn't change the relationship between Jesus and Peter, but it did correct Peter and put him in his place. So now they head up the mountain, and Jesus is going there to pray, and he has his closest friends with him. And it seems like this is something he would do regularly because a number of things happen. And this is what we find out from reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke talking about this is that the disciples grew sleepy, and um, while Jesus is praying, suddenly there are two other men there, and he is talking with them. Well, they wake up, or they uh, are no longer sleeping. They're interested. What's this going on? These people here, because Jesus looks different to them. Um, his face is bright and shining like light, and his clothes are described three different ways. One is that they look completely white. The second description is that they look like they've been bleached. So if you've had clothing that's been bleached, especially if it started off white, it'd be as white as it could get. The third description is that it looked like lightning. And so Jesus is glowing from within and kind of revealing something about his true nature and what he really is to these three disciples. And apparently they've picked up on the conversation that's been going on, that the two guys there are Moses and Elijah. Now, that's a big deal because if you'd gone to the Jewish leaders of the time, or even most of the observant Jewish people, and say, all right, who's the biggest guy in the faith of it? We're not talking about God, we're talking about just people. They go, oh, Moses, definitely. He's the bringer of the law, and he's the one who did all these great things for God and for the people. And second, if they were talking about the prophets, most of them would go Elijah, because if you remember the stories on Elijah, he did some great things as he was working for God. So these are like the top two guys they could imagine from their faith, and they are there talking with Jesus. And it seems to be about what's going to happen when he goes to Jerusalem and has all these things happen to him. So the disciples are scared, but Peter, being who he is, has to say something. And it looks like the conversation's wrapping up, and that Moses and Elijah are about to leave. And Peter says, oh, this is great that you can all be here. Why don't we make three shelters, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah? And he's kind of talking out of his head because he really doesn't know what to say. He is kind of scared at this point when he realizes who these guys are, because Moses died a long time ago, and Elijah never died. He had gone to heaven without dying. And another thing about Moses is that he had died before getting to come into the promised land. Well, now here he is in the promised land. So even Peter, uh, having had no great knowledge of things before he started following Jesus, will have known that this is a big deal for these two guys to be here. But it looks like they're about to leave. He has said this, let's build these shelters. Then a cloud envelops the mountain on which they are. And there's a voice that comes out of it. It's God the Father. And he says, this is my son. He's referring to Jesus, in whom I am well pleased, meaning I am happy with him. You listen to him. Now that tells us something else, tells us all something is as great as Moses and Elijah were. Jesus is even greater, and he's the one we should listen to. Well, as that happens, Peter and James and John hear God's voice and they fall down on their faces, which is the proper thing to do if you hear God's voice. They've bowed down. Well, then Jesus has them get up and they look around. Moses and Elijah are gone. The cloud is gone. And Jesus tells the three of them as they're going back down the mountain, don't tell anyone what you have seen here until after I've risen. Well, these three guys have some conversation about what that means. Right now, they still cannot get it into their heads that Jesus is going to physically die, and he is going to physically rise from the dead. Um, they've had the chance to see some people raised from the dead, but it's been through Jesus. And I guess they're having a difficult time understanding, okay, how can he raise himself if he's dead? They don't understand the power of God. And we should cut them some slack on that, because it is difficult to understand the power of God if you don't have the resources that we have. And I mean, the Bible, as far as that goes. So that is something that's going to carry on. But what we realize in all of this is that, okay, Jesus has his own plan, no matter what other people may have for him or what other people may want from him. Jesus is going to follow that plan. He follows the Father's instruction on everything. And that is something that we can learn from this. We figure out what God wants us to do, and we follow that, and we don't swerve to the right or the left. We stick with it. So with that, I'm going to leave this lesson with you, and I'm going to show you the tie I have. Normally you do not wear a white shirt with a white tie, but because of Jesus and the way he looked, when people got to saw what he really looks like, and it's described as white or bright or light, this is the closest I can get on that. So I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope to see you next time, and you have a great day. Bye.